Hello and welcome to today's PIR live event webinar brought to you by Partners in Research Canada. My name is Stacey Joyce and I will be your host. Remember, if you're joining us live, that you can ask questions anytime throughout the presentation or the Q&A part of our webinar by clicking chat near the top left corner of your screen. And just make sure you change the to field so it includes attendees as well as panelists. And that way the other classes that are joining us live will be able to see the questions or comments coming from your class and vice versa. So I will relay those questions to our guest when we get to the Q&A section, so no need to hold them back. I'll make sure to queue them up if you do ask them early. Today's guest is Dr. Kumanan Wilson. He is a senior scientist and physician at the Ottawa Hospital. He is a professor of medicine at the University of Ottawa, and he is the 2018 Partners in Research Canada Technology and Engineering Ambassador awardee, and a self-proclaimed clinical researcher and avid comic book fan. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Wilson. I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you for inviting me. Can you see the screen?
Not quite yet, so we need to click to share audio and then click share screen in the bottom right corner. Excellent.
Okay, great.
Good to go.
So this is the trailer for our comic book called Immunity Warriors, Invasion of the Alien Zombies. The digital comic book that we developed to teach children the importance of vaccination and the exciting science behind the immune system. So my name's Dr. Kumanan Wilson. I'm a physician at the Ottawa Hospital, and as mentioned, I'm an avid comic book fan. And I've been studying the immune system and immunization for a while, and we thought this would be a great way to engage with school children to teach them how important the immune system is and vaccination is. Most things, the most encounters with immunization with children are relatively unpleasant. And I think it's important for them to know how much benefit immunizations are doing for them. So the immune system is the human body's defense against alien invaders. And I think this analogy works really well. Our body is constantly under attack by alien invaders, and the most common of which are viruses and bacteria. And they're always looking to invade our body. So how do they invade? Well, our body has sort of a force field around it called the skin, and that's one of our major sources of protection. And sometimes there are breaks in this defense, in our force field, the skin, like a cut, for example, and the invaders can come in through that. We also need to have transport systems like our nose and mouth to get nutrition in and air in, and the invaders can sometimes come in through that. So viruses can slip in through our nose, for example. So what do they do when they get into our body? Well, for example, a virus can create what we call zombie armies. So here in the comic book, you see this alien invader breaking through the force field of the city. The city is effectively the cell of the human body. And in this case, the invader is the influenza virus. And when it breaks into the body, it opens up and it releases the secret recipe it had inside of it. And this is actually the genetic material of the virus. And then this goes to the headquarters of the cell, which is called the nucleus. And the nucleus is then tricked into making many, many copies of that virus. So one virus will go in and it'll create 1 million versions of itself that take over the city and then eventually break out. So here you see in the comic book, the virus is breaking out and being made. And this is sort of what it looks like in the cell. The virus is breaking through the cell wall, and then they go and infect other cells and do the same thing again and again. So this is pretty scary for the human body, but our body is able to fight back against these invaders. And it's got multiple levels of how it can fight back. It has a rapid response, what we call innate immunity. And we've already spoken about one of those levels of defense, the skin. But then it also has an early response system, fighters that go immediately to the battle site and start fighting. And these do attack the enemy in many ways. It can make the enemy explode. It can launch chemical attacks. It can swallow the enemy whole. And importantly, some of them get information about the enemy and send it back to central headquarters so that we can build specialized troops that are designed specifically to destroy the enemy. So here are some pictures of some of those frontline warriors of ours. Here's one called a natural killer cell. And this goes around the body and attacks anything that it identifies as not part of the human body. So this would be an invading virus or bacteria, or it could even be a renegade human cell, for example, a cancer cell. This is a phagocyte, and this is the type of frontline cell that actually swallows invading organisms whole. And you can see a picture on the right here of how it's swallowing an invading organism. But sometimes our frontline troops aren't enough, and we need special forces to come to the battle. And these take a little longer to develop, but they're designed specifically for the enemy when it attacks. And here are two types of elite forces, the B cells and the T cells. So the B cells fires missiles or antibody missiles, which stick to the invaders. And these prevent the invaders from attacking cells, and they also label the invaders for destruction. The T cells do several things. They can directly kill invaders. They can call for help. And importantly, when we talk about immunization, they can prepare for the next battle. They can have a memory of what the invader looks like and get ready to immediately prepare and launch an elite attack the next time the body is confronted by the invader. So in the comic, this is sort of how we made it look like. That's a natural killer cell destroying a virus. And the battle goes on in the city. And in the middle right-hand panel, you see the antibody missile being fired at the virus. And at the bottom, you see a macrophage swallowing a labeled virus that's labeled with an antibody missile. And sometimes if a cell is too infected, the elite force will go and destroy that cell to prevent it from creating more copies of the virus that will go and infect other cells. So here's an example of that happening. So we discussed how the immune system launches two levels of attack: an immediate attack to try to control the infection, and then an elite forces attack, where it is specifically designed to destroy the invader. But this can take a while, and in the process, the body can actually be damaged while it's fighting this war. So the question is, how can we prevent this from happening in the future? How can we prepare the body to attack more quickly, have those elite forces ready right away? And that's the miracle of vaccination. It trains the immune system to battle invaders. It sort of allows the immune system to practice against weakened invaders so that it's ready to launch an immediate attack. So in our comic book, this young scientist comes up with this discovery that this battle has caused a lot of damage, but she has a plan for how the body can be able to rapidly respond the next time it's attacked. So how do vaccines work? So as mentioned, you introduce a weakened or killed form of the disease into the body, a form that does not cause any disease itself, but it allows the body to practice. It allows the body to see it, and it creates those memory T cells I was talking about earlier. And so those are ready to immediately be employed the next time the body faces an invader. And so you'll have those antibodies ready, and the invader will likely be killed immediately before it causes any harm to the body. So we have many types of vaccines. We have vaccines for diseases like polio and measles. Immunization programs have eliminated diseases like smallpox and polio is on the brink of eradication. They've reduced the burden of disease from many other infectious diseases. They're our most effective way of preventing many of these diseases. So it's really important we all receive vaccinations, and they make our body stronger. And this is what we showed in the comic book. The body is ready. It's recognized the influenza vaccine, and it's ready to attack. And from a comic book perspective or a science fiction movie perspective, this is what we would expect to see upon the next invasion, an immediate destruction of the enemy. So to briefly summarize, then our body is constantly at risk of attack from invading organisms. We have two levels of defense. We have our innate immunity, which is a rapid response to the organisms. We have the adaptive immunity, which is our elite forces, our specialized response to the organisms. And vaccination is a way of preparing our body to rapidly mount a specialized response. So thank you very much for your time. If you want to see the comic book, it's at immunitywarriors.com. It's a digital comic book, digital motion comic book. You need to enable Flash on your computer, or you can download it as a PDF. For parents out there, we've created an app to help you track your families and your own immunizations and give you important information about immunizations. And that's free and federally supported and available at canimmunize.ca. And I'll leave it there and see if there are any questions. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's certainly a novel approach, I think, to science education to use a comic book. It's very, very interesting. We have a question right away from our grade 5s at Allenby Public School, wondering, how does a comic book help us learn about disease?
Well, that's a great question. I think one of the areas we haven't focused on enough when we're trying to improve immunization rates, we focus a lot on the parents. But we've sometimes neglected the children, and the children are the ones who receive the vaccines. And the vaccines are sometimes can cause a little bit of discomfort for children, so they can sort of have a negative feeling about the vaccines. And so what's the best way to engage with children? Well, we were thinking, initially we thought about a video, but then it was suggested, this was made by Algonquin College, that we do a comic book. And I found that when we tested that out, that worked really well. And we sort of were inspired by Star Wars, which was coming out at the time. So we sort of borrowed that motif to make the comic book. And the idea is to have kids sort of, they don't even know they're learning, but halfway through the comic book, they discover that this isn't actually a comic book about alien zombies, but about viruses. Right.
It's a very nice, elegant analogy, actually, that we think about the city and the invading aliens, etc., and to compare that to the cells in our body and the essentially alien viruses that are attacking them. We have another question from our grade 5s, wondering, does the bacteria or virus ever win the battle?
Unfortunately, in some conditions, sometimes it does. A lot of these diseases that we've been able to control with vaccinations used to cause serious harm. Smallpox was one of the most serious of these, and it killed a lot of people and harmed a lot of people. And because of immunization, we've eliminated that, and that's an amazing accomplishment. Polio used to cripple a lot of people through its infection. Even some of the ones that we don't think are that serious, like measles and such, actually used to cause a lot of harm and still do in some parts of the world. So these infections can be very serious, and these immunizations that we provide have really, really helped reduce the harm they can cause.
Right. And so now a question from Ms. Payne's class. Is the small amount of the virus that's in vaccines enough to make you sick if you come in contact with it?
So it causes a small reaction in your body. So sometimes it can cause a little bit of a pain in your arm. Might cause a slight fever, but it will not cause the infection that is designed to protect against. Sometimes they don't even, they either kill the virus or the bacteria, or they only take a component of it. They don't even put the whole bacteria in. They only put a component of it in so that the body can recognize that part of it, and then it'll be able to develop the memory T cells and the response.
Right. And we have a question now from Ms. Van Kempen McClinton's class. They're wondering very succinctly, can a vaccine kill you? And what I'd like to add to that is if we compare the risks of vaccination versus non-vaccination.
So vaccines are amongst our most tested for safety interventions because we give them to children and to healthy people, and they are extremely safe. And much safer than the risk of getting the diseases. Anytime you administer any intervention like an antibiotic or a vaccine, there's always a risk of an adverse reaction. But the vaccines, the risks are extremely low, like less than 1 in a million of that type of a reaction occurring. So compared to the risk of the infection itself, it's almost negligible.
Do you happen to know offhand, Dr. Wilson, roughly what that risk would be for one of the common ones, like say measles? Measles has come up again in Southern Ontario recently. So you said maybe 1 in a million of an adverse reaction to a vaccine. What about a more serious complication with one of the commonly vaccinated against illnesses like measles or rubella or something?
So, I'll take the flu vaccine, for example. The flu vaccine is quite well tolerated. It's fairly safe. 1 out of every million people who get the flu vaccine is at risk of something called, it's a rare condition, neurological condition that can affect your mobility. And so that's something that's watched out for. It's called Guillain-Barré syndrome. However, what we do know is the risk of Guillain-Barré syndrome from the flu itself is actually much higher. So even though there's a risk of getting it from the flu vaccine, you actually reduce your overall risk by getting the flu shot for getting that disease, because you reduce your risk of getting the flu itself. So a lot of these reactions you can get from the vaccines are actually minor manifestations of what you would get from the disease itself.
Right. And we have another question here from Ms. Payne's grade 5s from Allenby. They want to know if you could tell us about other ways to be vaccinated, perhaps other than an injection with a needle. So for example, inhaled vaccines.
So that's a great question. Obviously, children don't like getting shots, and they are looking at different ways of providing vaccines. The rotavirus vaccine is given through orally, something you swallow. And you used to give the polio vaccine that way. But now they're looking at exploring injections in your nose for the flu vaccine. They really haven't been able to get that to work quite as well as the injection, but that is something that they are exploring. And there are some vaccines that they do give by eating.
Right. And I'm just trying to see which question to ask next here. We have a question from Yoshi wondering, how are the B cells made in the body?
So those another great question. These cells are made in the bone marrow and in our lymph nodes. So the lymph node, when you get an infection in your throat, for example, you'll feel some bumps in your neck. Those are the lymph nodes, and they are getting prepared to produce the B cells and the T cells that'll go and fight the infection. Okay.
And going back to Ms. Van Gogh's class in Toronto, they're wondering what is in a T cell that can kill a virus? And what if your body does not have T cells that can help eliminate invaders?
Okay, then another couple of great questions. The T cell has chemicals inside it that it can inject into the virus and make that virus explode. and that's what we were trying to show in that scene, where it actually sometimes it does that to an infected cell as well. It'll destroy the cell. Some children very rarely can get a condition, are born with a condition where they don't have an immune system. We call it severe combined immunodeficiency syndrome. They test for that at birth in Ontario through newborn screening, and these children don't have B cells or T cells in particular, and they're at high risk of infection. They can get some vaccines, but they can't get any vaccines with live viruses or bacteria because they don't have an immune system. But in Ontario, we identify those children through the newborn screening program.
Wonderful. And switching gears again a little bit, Ms. Van Kempen McClinton's grade 6s in North Agincourt are wondering how viruses enter through the skin.
So sometimes you may notice when you get a cut, you get some goop around the cut, some pus, and that's why they always tell you when you get a cut to try to wash it, clean it, to keep it clean, because that's an opportunity then for the bacteria to get inside, and then it can create an infection there and replicate. And the pus you see is actually your body trying to start fighting the bacteria at the site. So usually it requires a cut in the skin or something to damage the skin before the bacteria, or in particular, can infect. So that's why they always tell you after you get a cut to wash it and keep it clean.
Right. And back to the idea of our sort of standard vaccinations in Ontario, and there's a schedule for those vaccinations that's recommended that we vaccinate children at certain ages. We have students at Allenby wondering if there is a better age to receive certain vaccines compared to others.
So our public health doctors look at this regularly and try to find the ideal schedule. They want to match it with when you're scheduled to take a baby to see your doctor as well, and when the body is best able to create an immune response to the vaccine, because the body needs to be able to develop those memory T cells. So they've worked on this, and for most of the established vaccines, they have it sorted out. Then as the newer vaccines come in, they see how many doses are actually needed. So sometimes you need more than one vaccination against a virus or a bacteria. The first vaccination gets most of the children the immunity they need, but sometimes you need a second exposure to the vaccine to make sure that everybody is immunized. And then even later on in life, like tetanus, for example, they always ask you every 10 years, have you got your tetanus shot? You need a booster to remind the immune system. So our scientists are always studying this to try to figure out how often those boosters need to be given.
Right. And Ms. Payne's class is wondering, how long does it take to become immune after you get a vaccine?
So that does vary from vaccine to vaccine. So with for example, the measles vaccine, you get your immune response about 2 to 3 weeks after you get the vaccination. So it's not uncommon to get a mild febrile illness 1 to 2 weeks after the measles vaccine. Other vaccines work more quickly. The flu shot takes about a couple of weeks as well to develop an immune system in you, 2 to 3 weeks.
Right. A bit of a different question, maybe on the immunology front, not so much vaccination in particular. The grade 6s at North Agincourt are wondering, do bandages actually prevent bacteria from invading the body?
That's the idea. We want to, when we have a cut in our skin, we want to both keep it clean, and we also want to cover it up to try to protect against invasion from the bacteria as much as possible. That can be challenging, particularly if a bacteria had already gotten in there at the time you got the cut. But the idea is to keep it sort of covered up to help the skin heal, and also to prevent bacteria from coming in.
Right. So back to vaccines, with a few other questions that have come in. How many vaccines are there? And is it possible to come up with one vaccine to attack all bacteria?
So there are a lot of vaccines, and they're discovering more vaccines to protect us from more diseases. Unfortunately, there is no way to put all of them into one shot, but they have been able to reduce the amount of versions of a virus we're exposed to through science. So you need to get a different vaccine for the different bacteria or viruses you're exposed to. But for each of those, there can be more than one type. So for a virus, there can be several different types of that virus. And that's why we actually have to get a flu shot every year, because the flu virus changes a little bit every year. And we have to change the vaccine every year to protect against, to remind our immune system. They are working on a universal flu vaccine so that hopefully that isn't needed. They can get one flu vaccine and it'll protect us against all the different types of flu shots.
Right.
For all the
And
types
so
of vaccines.
you've already read my mind on the next question. And the next one has to do with that changing. So this class has heard that DNA can mutate when bacteria enters the body. So are vaccines at all effective in these cases, or is that why we need a separate vaccine as they change?
That's why we need to get a vaccination, actually. You want to destroy the virus or bacteria before that can happen. The flu virus changes, it has a very ineffective way of replicating itself, so it can mutate. But if you get a vaccine, your body will destroy these viruses and bacteria before they can actually get settled in the body and start changing.
Right. And from Ms. Van Goo's class, how often do you need to vaccinate? Does the effect wear off eventually? I know you mentioned tetanus, for example. We find that we need a booster every 10 years. Can you tell us a bit more about that wearing off and why some do and some don't seem to wear off that quickly?
So that's, again, another great question. Like the pertussis vaccine for whooping cough is another one where we need a booster. I sort of think of this as an analogy of sort of in sports, practicing against another team or getting a practice squad to play against. And you practice, you get ready to play that team, and you're probably good for for that year, but maybe the next year you forget what exactly was right, or maybe in a couple of years you forget how that team played, and you need a reminder, so you have to get the practice team back out. And for some illnesses like tetanus and pertussis, we need that practice squad to come back, in which case the booster vaccine to help remind our body and just say, okay, this is what the virus or bacteria look like. For others like measles, where the vaccine is very effective actually, and we don't need that. You get your 2 shots of your measles, and it's so effective that it reminds the body, and the body is good for life.
Interesting. And there's obviously been studies, I assume, following people and checking their immunity. Is that how we decide which ones seem to be good for life and which ones need a booster or several over a lifetime?
Yeah, so they actually measure those antibodies I was talking about, those that are used by the B cells, and they can measure those in your blood. And if you have antibodies against the virus or bacteria, then you're protected. And if not, you might need another vaccine against that condition.
Right. So one last question about vaccines. Can you get all the vaccines you need at once? So we talked about how it can't be in one injection, but could you get many injections for many different vaccinations at once? Or why is it that the public health schedule suggests you wait a few weeks in between each one?
So they've designed the schedule to create the optimal immune response, the best immune response in the child or the adult. and they want the immune system to sort of focus one at a time or a few at a time on the virus or bacteria they expose it to. And so that's how they've over time determined this is the best way to spread them out. So they do give more than one at a particular visit. So they do a combined diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus vaccine. They'll give you your measles and your varicella vaccine for chickenpox together. And they've identified the period in between getting the boosters as well. That's ideal for helping give you the best immune response to that vaccination. They don't want to give you a booster too early because then you may actually not respond to the booster because you're already launching an immune response to the first vaccine.
Right. So a little more general before we cut off today, maybe you could let us know a bit about your sort of educational and career path in case we have students with us who are interested in this type of thing and might want to know how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So I'm an internal medicine physician, but I've been very interested in public health, and immunization is, as I mentioned, probably one of the most effective public health interventions we have. So I've been studying immunization for a while, and about 15 years ago, I started noticing that people weren't as supportive of immunization as I thought that people thought that they might be, and there were rumors and about vaccines, and despite the fact that science had disproved all these rumors, they were persisting, and immunization rates were dropping in some areas, and this was causing outbreaks of disease that we could otherwise protect, and these diseases could cause a lot of harm to children. So I've been trying to think about how are ways we can help improve immunization rates and confident immunizations, and the two approaches sort of with, we've got now digital technologies, and they've opened up a lot of opportunities for us, and so the app we developed is one way to help parents just keep track of the schedule. People have pointed out that they can be complicated, and parents can use help in helping track all of their children's immunizations. So that's one strategy we used, and we hope that parents will get accurate information on immunizations through the app. And then the second strategy is use digital technologies to help educate children. And this comic book came out of that. And this was sort of prompted when I was volunteered by my wife to give a lecture, talk to my son's grade 5-6 split class, and had to come up with sort of a creative way to get the idea across.
And is that when you came up with the analogy of the invaders and that the comic book is based on? Yeah,
because as I mentioned, Star Wars was coming out at the time, so I thought, let's try this, and it actually worked surprisingly well. And then Algonquin College here offered to help develop it, and I thought we'd do a video first, but they suggested a comic book, which I think worked much better.
Right. And just to leave off today, do you have any advice for students who might be interested in either getting involved in public health, or maybe the other side of things and just using a medium like a comic book to communicate science?
I mean, I think a couple of things. I hope they read the comic book. And when I grew up, I always thought the immune system was one of the coolest things out there, and how it was able to do all of these amazing different ways of fighting invaders. So I hope they get interested in science and start studying the immune system, and maybe come up with the next vaccine or the next way to battle disease. At the same time, I know kids are often better than their parents at using digital technologies and apps and the internet and computers and learning how to code. So that opens up a lot of possibilities of new ways and educating people, communicating with people, and I'd encourage children to use their imagination and use these technologies to figure out, how can we use this to improve our health system? For example, improve immunization rates, or make people more aware of simple things they can do to protect themselves. And I think kids in particular are really some of the, maybe our best opportunity to figure some of these out, because they're so familiar with these technologies. You know, is there a video game we could make that could help with this? Is there a virtual reality type approach to help people understand the immune system?
Very, very interesting ideas for the future. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Wilson, and answering our questions today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
And just a quick note that tomorrow on PIR Live event, we are discussing the bacteria that live inside our bodies. And next week, we'll learn about monarch butterflies. More information about these webinars and other PIR educational programming is available at pirweb.org. Thanks so much for tuning in, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye now.